Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Evan Anderson. I will be your moderator today. I want to remind you all that your video and audio is set to off during this presentation, but we do have the chat available. Please use that for questions. If you have questions during the presentation, type them into the chat and we'll get to them after the presentation is over. I'm going to introduce our speaker now. We have Dr. Bill Kern with us. Dr. Kern is an associate professor in the Department of Entomology and Nematology at the Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center of the University of Florida. His areas of expertise are urban entomology, Africanized honeybee management, vertebrate pest management, nuisance wildlife management, and medical veterinary entomology. That is a whole slew of things, so he's quite the generalist as well as specialist. His primary extension activities are education of the pest control industry on general household pests, wood-destroying organisms, and structural fumigation, and education of beekeepers, first responders, pest control operators, and the general public, including master gardeners, about Africanized honeybees. With that, I'm going to let Dr. Kern take over.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Now we're going to be talking about invasive wildlife species. So we're just going to be talking about vertebrates, and we're not going to be talking about all of the non-native species that have shown up in Florida. That would take an entire week. There's a couple of slides towards the beginning of the talk where there's a little icon that you can press and you can hear the sound of the giant toad and the Cuban tree frog. We tried to do it so I could play it, but I guess you're going to have to each hit that button and play the audio clip as we go along. The first thing I want to remind everybody is when we talk about invasive species, and in this case, since I'm talking about invasive wildlife, I'm talking about vertebrates. Invasive, by definition, is a non-native species, and also it is doing either ecological or economic harm. So you can have something that is a non-native species, and I'll give you an example of that later on, that is not invasive, simply because they don't do any ecological or economic harm. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with the amphibians. Okay. All right, so we have had 21 frogs and toads found in Florida and 6 salamanders. These have been reported in Florida, but really there's only 4 that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has declared as established. These include the greenhouse frog, Eleutherdactylus planarostris, and it's been here since 1863. And for a long time, they actually thought the greenhouse frog was native to Florida. It was a naturally occurring species. Cuban tree frog got here in the 1920s. The cane toad or giant toad, Rhinella mariana, in about 1936. And there's still debate about how it got here, whether it was through the pet trade or through a deliberate release. But it's been here for a good while. And then African clawed frog, Xenopus laevis, has been established since the 1970s. And the ones we're going to talk about, the most widespread ones, are going to be the Cuban tree frog and the cane toad or giant toad. I'm not going to worry about the greenhouse frog, even though it is very widely distributed. It doesn't seem to cause any kind of either ecological or economic damage that we know of. And the clawed frog has a very small range. Okay, so the first critter is the giant toad. They're also called the marine toad or the cane toad, Rhinella marinus. And this is the one that for some reason a lot of people want to call a bufo toad, because originally its name was Bufo marinus. However, it is not in the genus Bufo. And of course, our native toads are no longer in the genus Bufo either. Now, you should see a little, looks like a little speaker button. If you hit that, you'll be able to hear what giant toads sound like when they're calling. And I'll give everybody a chance to do that. And hopefully it works. So you should be able to hear that it is a very coarse, guttural kind of rumbling call, which is very different from any of our native toads. That it's more of a trill, a higher frequency trill. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Now it's playing. Okay, well, now we do have native toads, and it's important to be able to tell the difference. The giant toad has no distinctive crests on the top of its head, whereas our native southern toad, which is the one that occurs throughout most of Florida, it has two little knobs on the end of the crest that run between its eyes. The other really good character is it has an oval, moderately small gland, parotoid gland. With the cane toads, they have a massive triangular gland that is, almost the size of their head in comparison. So these are the characters you can use to recognize, even on small ones, because you can have a juvenile giant toad that's the same size as an adult of our native southern toad. So you have to look more carefully to be sure what you're seeing is one of our, either a native toad or this invasive cane toad. All right, again, we have the little speaker, and you can hit that and it should play. Osteopila septentrionalis is the Cuban tree frog. It's a highly invasive species, not only in Florida, and that's an old map that you see there. They've actually found them all the way up into Georgia now. But even in the Caribbean, throughout the Caribbean, this has become an invasive species, oftentimes competing with native local frogs. Okay. Don't know why it's still showing the giant toad. All right, and so this is whenever somebody calls me up and says that they have a big white tree frog on, by their lights at night, it's almost always going to be a Cuban tree frog. And they can range from almost an olive color to an ashy gray, ashy tan, to almost white at night. And they are known to actually prey on our native tree frogs. So in many areas where Cuban tree frogs occur, they displace our native tree frogs. So that's the economic damage. Okay. The other complaint we get from homeowners is when these guys are calling, because they can be quite loud. And frequently you'll have numerous individuals around a house. And of course, both in the giant toad and the Cuban tree frog, only the males call. All right. Now we'll move on to reptiles. Oops. Now I'm hearing it. Okay. All right, so we're going to start with the reptiles. And in terms of the invasive lizards, we have the members of the Iguanidae. These are iguana, the green iguana, and then the two species of spiny-tailed iguanas from Central America, both the Mexican and the black. Now, the ctenosaurs are not a species of concern. And we'll talk about that list from FWC when we get towards the end of the reptile section. So this is a male green iguana. Most of these originally came from northern South America. There was a period of time when we were getting lots of them from Brazil for the pet trade. Then Brazil shut down the export, and then we started getting most of them from Colombia, Guyana, in the northern tier of countries of South America. This is a male with a couple of females, and you can see that his dorsal spines are much taller than the females. Females also tend to be retain this sort of olive green color their entire life. And this is a fairly large female. She was almost 4.5, 5 feet long. And you can tell that she has been courted by a male because you can see that little U-shaped love bite on her tail, the base of her tail. And each of these can produce around 30 to 40 eggs at a time. They generally are going to nest once, sometimes twice, in the late spring and early summer. The males can be quite striking. During the breeding season, which is usually starts anywhere from December through March, the males become almost this golden orange color, which makes them really stand out. Now, this is what people think about when they talk about green iguanas. This is the juveniles that they sell in the pet store. Well, they used to sell in the pet store. They can no longer legally do that. So, you know, people see this, that their kids say they really want to have a pet iguana. The problem that most people don't realize is that these are long-lived animals. So a green iguana can potentially live 25 to 28 years, which is more than most people are willing to devote to a pet. And then get quite adult male, the lizard. The man holding it is also an adult male who is well over 6 feet tall. So you can see that lizard is about 6 feet long and probably weighs somewhere between 15 and 18 pounds. So this is a big adult male. The natural range of the green iguana is from the northern half of South America through Central America. And then they also have island hopped through the Lesser Antilles, at least as far as the U.S. Virgin Islands. The iguanas that you see in Puerto Rico and Cuba and Hispaniola, those are actually recently imported animals that have become established. So green iguanas are not naturally occurring on Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, or Jamaica. And in case, people tell you that iguanas don't have teeth, this is to show you that they're wrong. Now, these teeth remind me of grapefruit spoons. They're serrated, and these are really for slicing up plant material, leaves, flowers, fruit, but they can deliver a significant bite, and they will cut skin if they bite you. Normally, they're going to try to run away. They're going to slap you with their tail and try to run away. Some of the problems associated with iguanas include these nesting burrows that are dug out by the females. Now, they only use these once, so they'll dig the burrow, then she'll dig a pit nest in the bottom of the chamber in the bottom of the burrow, and then that's where she'll lay her eggs. After she lays her eggs, she will leave this burrow and she won't return. Now, ptenosaurs do actually live in burrows. So that's one of the differences between green iguanas and the spiny-tailed iguanas. Another common problem we have is fecal contamination. They eat plant material, so they're going to have to eat a lot of plant material to get the nutrition they need, and so they're going to defecate quite a bit. And being reptiles, they are prone to harbor salmonella in their digestive tract. So salmonella is a real serious problem. So we have to be careful with surfaces that are contaminated with feces of iguanas. Now, the other two species that occur in Florida are the Mexican spiny-tailed iguana, Tenosura pectinata, and this is a male. And you notice that the spines are much shorter, the dewlap is much smaller, and these are smaller animals. Normally, they're going to be around 3.5, 3 feet long. So half the size, half the length of a green iguana. This is a male black spiny-tailed iguana. You can see that, again, it has short spines on its back and a very small dewlap, if anything. They're called the spiny-tailed iguanas because they are raised scales in rings around the tail. And these are partly used defensively. If somebody grabs a hold of one of these iguanas by the tail, they'll actually start spinning, and they can actually do some damage with those scales. All right, we're moving on, and the genus Enolas. We actually have a native. We have a native Enolas in Florida in the United States, and that's Enolas carolinensis, the green anole. For those of us in South Florida, I haven't seen a green anole in a long time. Usually what I see are Cuban green anoles, Enolas procatus. Now, procatus seems to be, there's some evidence that it's actually the same species as carolinensis, and they're just different subspecies. So maybe we have them, but the most common invasive anole that we see is the Cuban anole. They have a brown body color. They can change from dark brown to a light tan. The males have a big reddish orange dewlap with a yellow fringe. And I always thought that dewlap kind of looks like a strawberry with those yellow scales looking like seeds. And these actually are fairly aggressive, so they tend to displace our native Enolas carolinensis. Another invasive species we have is the Cuban nighted knoll, and a lot of our Cuban neighbors down here in South Florida call these iguanitos, which means little iguana, but these are actually a true Enolas, Enolas equestris. The primary economic or environmental damage they do is they are kind of notorious for eating baby birds out of the nest. So that's one of the concerns that we have with these, and they can be quite large. An adult male can get up to 14 inches long. Female is usually going to be smaller than that, around 8 to 10 inches. And then we have this other diversity of introduced anoles. There's quite a few of them total, but these are just some representatives of some of the different species that also occur in Florida. So they are non-native, but so far they haven't turned out to be invasive. So they're not doing economical or ecological damage. The next family we're going to talk about are the Teidae. These are the Tegus, the race runners, and the whiptails. Our native one is Aspidioscalus Aspidiocellus sexlineata, the 6-line race runner. Now, when I learned this was still a nematophorus, but they have changed the name on me again. And then we have several introduced species. The one that's spreading the most quickly seems to be Amaiva, the giant Amaiva, or giant jungle runner. And then we also are having widespread distribution of the Argentine black and white tegu. So we'll talk about those next. So Salvator Mariana is the Argentine black and white tegu, and these can become quite large, easily 4 feet, maybe up to 5 feet in length. Usually it's going to be 3 to 4 feet. They are the ecological equivalent to the monitor lizards in the New World. So these occur in tropical America, and because we don't have any monitor lizards in the New World. So they ecologically fill that niche. They have kind of interesting teeth. They have big crushing teeth in the back of their mouth. And they have a very a good fondness for snails. So they can crush snails. They can crush birds' eggs without too much difficulty. And then if you look at the teeth in front, they are conical and kind of hook-shaped for grabbing a hold of prey. And these can be quite formidable predators. And then this is the one that I've been getting lots and lots of calls about recently, as it's been spreading from South Florida and is eventually spreading northward. This is the giant Amaiva, or the jungle runner, and it's one of the largest Amaivas in tropical America, and it occurs both in the islands and in the mainland, Central and South America. The males often have, when they're in breeding color, have these brilliant turquoise scales, greenish back. The female on the right, you can see that her tail and most of her back and her back legs are green, and she doesn't have nearly as much of that vivid blue. Whether or not these are invasive, they're definitely non-native, and they have the potential for being invasive because they are large predators, and so they may impact some of our native lizards, like Florida scrub lizard, as well as green Enolas, um, the little brown skinks could all be victims to this guy. So they have the potential for being invasive. Nile monitors. This is probably one of the most unpleasant invasive reptiles that we have. Get to over 7 feet in length. They're found on both coasts. There's a breeding population in Cape Coral. And when I show you the distribution map, that's the one where they've actually reported over, I think, 411 sightings. And then we also have them in South Florida, but they are spreading. It's a possibility they could actually occur throughout all of Florida at some point. So this shows that the distribution. See, 441 is where Cape Coral is located. The next highest density is Palm Beach County. And even in Broward, where I'm located, we've had quite a few sightings. But if you look at the map from I think I took this map 2 days ago, you can see that their distribution is increasing in the state. They are occupying more and more counties, and a lot of these, they may actually be in places, and we just haven't had records of them yet. So this animal is spreading through Florida, and they are known to take small livestock, especially things like poultry. So they can be a problem. And then this is a visitor who probably came in with the pet trade, but it's also possible it came in on cargo out of the Bahamas. So this is the northern curly-tailed lizard. So they occur throughout much of the Bahamas, and we're not very far from the Bahamas in Florida. And these guys have been systematically spreading northward. And even in the 20 years I've been in Broward County, I've seen their populations increase and spread to areas where they weren't located before. So these guys are spreading. Some people find them pretty disturbing. They're mostly insect eaters, although occasionally they will eat fruit. So they seem to have a real strong fondness for strangler fig fruits. But mostly they're going to be feeding on insects in the environment. So yes, they're non-native. Some people consider them pests, so that would make them invasive. Now, when we talk about invasive reptiles, this is what everybody thinks about, is Burmese pythons. So far, the largest one I've seen in South Florida was just 1 inch shy of 18 feet. So that's a good size female snake. A snake that size can give birth to 60 to 80 eggs, and then she'll incubate those eggs, and her young have a good chance of surviving. That's why they're really taking over South Florida. So these are the large snakes that have been found either as individuals or as breeding populations in Florida. So these have actually been found. Indian or Burmese pythons, those are 2 different subspecies. And you'll probably never find an Indian python in Florida. The reason being is they're an endangered species and extremely valuable. Nobody's going to let an Indian python escape. Burmese pythons are pretty common. They get big. You know, kids go off to school. Mom and dad don't want to take care of it anymore, and it escapes. All right. So, but these are ones that have been seen. We have caught northern African pythons, or sometimes they're called African rock pythons. Reticulated pythons, I haven't seen any retics caught, but boa constrictors definitely. We have captured green iguanas, yellow iguanas. So these are the species that have been found in Florida and are either established or potentially could become established. So in February of this year, the FWC added, let's see, it was 16 species to the restricted reptile list. So this includes Indian Burmese and Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, African rock pythons, Southern African pythons, amethystine python, scrub python, and then the green anaconda, and then Nile monitors, green iguanas, and tegus, all species of tegus. So these have been added to the reptiles of concern list. If you currently own them, you can get a permit and you can keep them for the life of the animal. But these are no longer to be sold in Florida. And if you don't have one now, you're not supposed to be getting one. The original prohibited non-native reptile list, it only had 5, well, the brown tree snake from Guam, well, that made it to Guam and caused all kind of damage. And then 3 of the anacondas, and then all of the sea snakes, because they are extremely venomous, and they are from the Indo-Pacific region. There are no, as far as I know, there are no Atlantic sea snakes. So the one last snake I want to talk about, this is the Brahminy blind snake, Indotyphlops brahminus, and formerly you may have heard of it as Ramphotyphlops. So this is also sometimes called the flower pot snake, because very often you'll find them in the saucers underneath flower pots. They are most often confused with earthworms. People think that they're earthworms, but these are actually true snakes. Another interesting thing about them is that they are parthenogenic. So all the females that all the individuals we have in Florida are females, and they reproduce identical offspring to the mother. They feed on the eggs and larvae and pupae of ants and termites. So even though these are non-native, I would tend to argue that they're not doing any economic damage. And so we probably shouldn't call them invasive. But they're very widespread, so some people might consider them to be invasive. They're definitely non-native, but I don't think they do any harm, really. All right, birds. There are a lot of exotic birds in Florida. So far, 195 species of exotic birds have been reported in Florida, in the wild. These include things like Muscovy ducks, which are actually feral livestock in Florida. Matter of fact, in all of the United States, except a very small part of the Rio Grande Valley, Muscovy ducks are feral livestock. They are derived from livestock individuals that were brought to the United States. The rock dove, also known as the feral pigeon, again, this is a domesticated animal. there are no, as far as I know, there are no true rock doves in the United States. They are all derived from feral pigeons, which are either raised for sport, show, sport being racing, show being fancy pigeons, and then third is for the production of squab. Eurasian collar dove, budgies, a lot of the hill mina, the Indian mina. These are probably all things that were brought to Florida as pets. So we have about 44 species of parrots that have been found in the state, and we know that at least 3 species are established. But the ones I'm going to talk about are the feral livestock species, and then European starling, and the house sparrow, and the monk parakeet. And people forget that the house sparrow is actually an invasive exotic species, or invasive species. So it is both non-native and economically damaging. So that's the concern that we have. The main problem that we have is they like to nest inside buildings, and so they become a problem in stores, in warehouses. They will nest in the soffits of houses and become a source of bird mites to bite people inside the house after the baby birds fledge. European starlings, same kind of thing. They were actually deliberately brought to the United States by a gentleman from England because he thought all of the birds mentioned in Shakespeare should occur in the United States. So he brought starlings and introduced them. And from there, they expanded throughout North America. And they also been carried to other parts of the world. These are very successful birds. They feed on a wide variety of things. They can even tolerate very cool conditions because they nest inside buildings, so they can take advantage of the heat that we have in our buildings. So now these are both in the winter coloration. In the summer colors are almost solid black. But in the winter, their winter plumage, they have the speckled appearance. And feral pigeons, all of the pigeons that you see, well, except for white crown pigeons, which are native, all right, all the pigeons that you see flying in parks or around bridges or on power lines, these are feral pigeons. So they are derived from livestock that has reverted back to the wild. A lot of times they are were originally racing pigeons that didn't bother going home. And again, the big problem with them is defecation on structures because they nest on structures. They also can be vectors for diseases to our native wildlife. They are the host and primary vector for the lousefly, the pigeon lousefly, which can also attack other members of the pigeon and dove family. They are vectors for fowl pox that can affect other species of birds as well. And one of the big concerns is that bird feeders, these feral pigeons, are the source of diseases that infect our native birds. So these three species of birds are, they're notorious. They have a very large range and distribution. There are some estimates that there are hundreds of millions of starlings in North America and Canada. And I remember seeing clouds of starlings flying over in Indiana, and they literally blotted out the sky. And some of these others, this is the Indian myna, and it can be a problem because it's also a structure nester. It likes to nest in signs, just like starlings do. It's actually related to starlings, and that's both mynas and starlings are very good mimics. So a lot of times when you hear strange sounds, strange bird calls especially, you have to look around, and sometimes it's either a myna or a starling. Monk parakeets or Quaker parrots. This is the only parrot that I know of that actually constructs these stick nests. Virtually all other parrots are cavity nesters. So they nest in old woodpecker holes and hollow trees. But these guys will actually make a nest, so they're less dependent on the presence of hollow trees. And because they make these large communal nests, they form large flocks. That's why you'll usually see lots of them. So there we go. They can also do agricultural damage, ornamental damage when they prune branches from oak trees or palms or other fruit trees. They have a real fondness for bottlebrush trees. They cut the branches and they use that to build these stick nests. Feral domestic waterfowl, Muscovy ducks are not native. They are not protected in Florida. They are native to Central and South America. All of the birds that we see in Florida and the United States originally were brought here by the USDA as livestock species because they're both a good meat and egg producing duck. So when you hear people talk about, oh, you can't hurt Muscovies because they're endangered species, that's talking about the native birds in tropical America. All of the Muscovies that you see in Florida and in the United States are these feral domestic birds. Non-migratory mallards. So if you find mallards in Florida in the summertime, those are non-migratory. They're not supposed to be here. So those are actually, again, feral domestic waterfowl. Peking ducks, which are essentially white mallards. Chinese and African geese, you'll occasionally find in lakes and ponds. You notice I don't mention Egyptian geese here because Egyptian geese would be classified as non-native wildlife, potentially invasive wildlife, but they are not domesticated birds. All right, feral domestic fowl, feral chickens, feral peafowl, feral guineas, and feral pigeons. All right. All right. I've got a question about how do Muscovies impact us? Mostly it's going to be aesthetic damage. To wildlife, however, they transmit disease. There's a virus, I think it's actually a herpes virus that is transmitted by Muscovy ducks to our native ducks. And that can be a serious fatal disease in our native ducks, such as Florida ducks. and tree ducks.
We're running a bit short on time, Dr. Kern, so about 5 minutes
Oh,
before we want to start taking questions, okay?
all right, we're almost finished. Um, the exotic mammals, and people forget about this. The most destructive animals in terms of cost to human beings are roof rats, Norway rats, and house mice. They transmit diseases. They damage and contaminate food. So these are extremely important animals, and we forget that these are invasive mammals. They are not native to the New World. Roof rats have been here since the 1600s, Norway rats since the 1800s, house mice probably again since the 1600s. We'll also talk about Koipu, and then a little bit about some of these feral domestic animals, including feral swine. House mouse. This is probably one of the most expensive pests to human beings. Estimated cost for the whole United States is probably bordering between 500 million and $1 billion worth of damaged product and cost of control. And these are also vectors of leptospirosis and vectors of the house mouse mite, which can transmit a rickettsial disease to human beings. Roof rats, Norway rats, and again, in North America, these cause over $1 billion worth of damage and cost of control to consumers. So these are economic threats. These are non-native species. Roof rats, they were responsible for carrying bubonic plague throughout Europe, and cost. We don't even know how many millions of lives during the 1600s. Now, roof rats are the main rat that we have to deal with in Florida. Norway rats show up occasionally, but roof rats are the primary one. They're also called black rats, fruit rats, citrus rats, palm rats, but this is Rattus rattus. And if you have a rat problem in a suburban neighborhood, this is the rat that's doing it. If you're having a problem with rats in agricultural settings, this is probably the rat that's doing it, but you could also have Norway rats. These are significant pests, cause significant economic harm. This is the Koipu. Now, a lot of Americans know this as the nutria. It was brought from Central South America, from Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and it was brought here for the fur industry. And when it was brought here, it was advertised as the nutria rat. All right, nutria rat means the otter rat. Well, Americans, being who we are, we cut off the rat part and just called them nutria, which really confuses our Spanish-speaking residents, because nutria is an otter. That's why I prefer the name Koipu. Native to temperate and subtropical South America, they have been introduced into the United States mostly in the 1880s to the 1920s. And what we found was they really are destructive to wetlands, marshes. They also damage engineering, such as dams, levees, canal banks, things like that. And finally, feral hogs. whether you call them wild hogs, piney wood rooters. We don't have wild boar in Florida. These are all feral pigs. And remember, until 1957, most people just let their pigs run loose, and then they would catch them up in the fall to butcher them. For control, primarily exclusion fences, pen traps, which is what you see here, snares, hunting with both dogs and without dogs, and using night vision and thermal imaging scopes. These are an animal you can just about kill them any way you want on private property, including hunting them at night with thermal scopes. And sort of last but not least, all right, wild monkeys. We have 3 kinds of wild monkeys in Florida. It is against the law to feed them. People like monkeys. They think they're cute. They forget that many of these monkeys, especially the rhesus monkeys in Florida, are vectors or have herpes B. All right. This disease is fatal to humans. You know, it doesn't bother the monkeys. It's just like herpes simplex in people. But if herpes B gets into humans from a bite from a monkey, it is quite often fatal. That's one of the main reasons why you don't want to mess with monkeys. Whether you're talking about wild monkeys here in Florida or monkeys in Africa or Asia, or even not so much in tropical America, but they do vector these diseases, and you have to be aware of that. And that's the end. So now we'll take questions.
Yeah, we had a few questions come in, and I understand we're running a little short on time, but I think we're backed up on lunch, so we can probably go a few minutes over and not have too much trouble. One question from Clara Mullins was, what's the best humane way to remove or kill invasive amphibians or reptiles?
For the method that we commonly use for invasive amphibians is you can anesthetize them with lidocaine, rub lidocaine on their belly until they become unconscious, and then freeze them. You can also pith them, where you basically put a needle into their spine and up into their brain and destroy the brain. But that takes some special skill to do it humanely, because you can't be wishy-washy about it. For reptiles, for large reptiles, what we normally will do is use a captive bolt gun. So destroy the brain with a captive bolt gun, and then go in with a crochet hook and pith them to completely destroy the brain. They're in Florida. You have to follow the recommendations of the American Veterinary Medical Association Panel on Euthanasia, or the American Association of Zoo Veterinarians, their manual on euthanasia. That's in Florida law. So you have to follow those rules. And they are pretty exacting. Okay, let's see. How far north have Africanized bees gone? Well, in Florida, we found them throughout most of the state, but in terms of the actual range of them, basically it's from I-4 south. All right, let's see.
Have you seen any Kenyan boas or invasive fish in our area? If you just want to.
Oh, lots and lots. We probably have as many species of invasive fish as we have all other vertebrates combined, because of the tropical fish trade, and that includes both marine and freshwater fish. So some of they're here, they're established. Many of them either escaped from fish farms or people dumped their fish when they got tired of them, which is usually what happens.
Okay. The bird list you put up, was that non-native or specifically invasive?
That was all of the non-native species that have been seen. Not all of them are established.
Okay.
And the FWC has pretty strict guidelines for what they consider to be established. Yeah, especially in South Florida, I actually get thrilled every time I see a native bird. It's almost like a native reptile. I get real excited when I see a native reptile down here because almost everything's exotic. Okay, any more questions?
Let's see. What is the concern about hunting wild birds and parasites or diseases that they might spread?
Okay.
Is it mostly if you cook it, it's fine?
Yeah, if you cook it, it's fine. Yeah, that's a fairly complex issue because all of our native birds are essentially protected, except for the game birds like quail and turkey. All of our waterfowl are protected except during the hunting season. These invasive species theoretically can be taken at any time. And on your own property, you can do it. So English sparrows, starlings, depending on local ordinances, peafowl, Muscovy ducks, and by the way, Muscovies make really good fajitas. We've also had a situation in Broward County a couple of years ago where waterfowl pox hit the Muscovies, and I mean we had lots of dead Muscovies in the county, to the point where the rehabbers wouldn't even accept any more Muscovy ducks because they were gonna die. So they automatically, if they were brought in, they were automatically euthanized. Okay, any more questions?
Anything to say about peafowl? Somebody had a question about people fighting for those in their neighborhoods.
They're not bad eating.
But not invasive, nothing to worry.
No, they're definitely invasive. They're feral livestock.
Okay.
So, and feral livestock, according to Florida law, belongs to the person whose property they're found on. So when peafowl come onto your property, they are your responsibility. You're responsible for the damage they do, and you can do with them pretty much anything you want as long as it's not considered inhumane.
I know they certainly make a lot of noise. Let's see. Do mallards crossbreed with mottled ducks?
With mottled ducks? You mean Florida
Mottled?
ducks? Okay.
The question is
Yeah,
mottled ducks.
yeah, Florida mottled ducks. Yes, they can, and that's the problem. When you have these non-migratory mallards, they can hybridize with Florida ducks, the Florida mottled duck, and it's what we call genetic pollution of the program of the species. So the Florida mottled duck is a unique species to Florida, and it would be a shame if it just got bred out of existence because of these feral domestic birds. Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, we had one on the best way to control rats. I'm concerned about the secondary kill from predators consuming sick or dead rats that ate poison bait. usually used by pest control companies that put out bait boxes, and about animals other than rats eating the poison?
Actually, most of the situations we have with either secondary poisoning or with accidental poisoning is from homeowners, not from pest control operators. Because if you use a bait station, most animals aren't going to be able to get into it. Squirrels aren't generally going to go into a bait station. It's not their nature to go into a dark hole. And personally, I primarily use traps. I use either snap traps or the electronic traps, just because I don't want to have to worry about it, because I have a dog. So I almost exclusively use traps, and I like snap traps because they're inexpensive and they're effective. Okay.
Don't Cuban tree frogs have a nasty coating on their skin which can cause irritation?
It can. There's a slime, and all tree frogs have it. What they do is they take it and they rub it over their body so that during the day they actually don't dry out. So they're waterproofing. Some people are sensitive to it, and occasionally will get a rash from handling Cuban tree frogs. It also is distasteful. So a lot of our snakes that would normally eat frogs don't like Cuban tree frogs. So that's also one of the reasons that they've been so successful.
Okay, and last, looks like we're saving the best for last. Any suggestions about what to do about iguanas pooping on top of our pool screen? We can't reach it to remove it. I suppose, how can you keep iguanas from getting all over the pool screen, or is there any repellents for them or anything like that?
The repellents that are available right now are feeding deterrents. What you may want to think about doing is installing a shock track on the top of your screen enclosure. That will stop the iguanas from climbing up and going onto the screen over the pool. It's not going to stop them from climbing the side screens, but it may help to stop them from going out over the pool and defecating on those screens over the pool.
All right.
And Amy said shock traps work great. I'm
Great.
assuming she's talking about the electronic traps for rats.
Well, that looks like all the questions we have. Dr. Kern, thank you so much. We have some comments that thank you very much for your presentation. It was great. Really appreciate it, and thank you.
And remember, if you have any questions, you can contact me at whk@ufl.edu. Matter of fact, I guess I could put it in the chat.
I gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, whk@ufl.edu. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have about identifying things or asking how to deal with things. Oh, that's
Identify that one for us.
yeah. That's my wife's Chihuahua. Evidently, he needs to go out. So I think we're finished. So I hope everybody learned at least one or two new things today.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kern. So if
Yeah.
everyone wants to click the red button, and then you're going to go and join the lunch meeting if you want, the lunch break with the bookstore. And if not, we'll see you at 1 o'clock. Just make sure to leave this meeting and then click on the next session that you want to go to. So we'll see you then.